or webinar series. We're calling this Webinar Wednesdays, so you can join us every Wednesday for a new webinar. The focus of today's webinar is criminalization of gender-based violence survivors. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Yursich. With AVA, I'm an early career researcher and webinar series lead, along with my colleagues Jason and Andrea, who are here today, as well as the co-director of the Frida Center for Research on Violence Against Women and Children. On a national level, we at AVA encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous people of the lands on which they live, work, or visit, and become engaged allies together. We, as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and their rights and responsibilities in culture, languages, and the pursuit of wellness. Sorry, Emma, can you advance the slide?
Sorry, I'm just having difficulty. There we go.
Perfect. So just a couple of quick reminders for today, just a few procedural things. This session is being recorded, which is great because that means that you can revisit it as a resource at any time, or you can share it with colleagues and friends who may benefit. Jason will be monitoring the chat. If anything comes up and you send a direct message in terms of questions about tech, anything like that, Jason can assist you. And throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function to pose questions to our speakers. And at the end of the session, we will make time to go through your questions and have our speakers provide answers. Next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Rosa Jeyapalan and Callandra Cochrane. Rosa has been a dedicated advocate for marginalized communities for 3 decades. She began her career in 1995 as a frontline counselor in a women's shelter, providing direct support for survivors of violence. In 2000, she joined the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic as a housing worker, later transitioning into case management to assist clients facing complex social and legal challenges. Her commitment to social justice led her to work on the Alliance for Gender Justice and Migration Project, focusing on advocacy and systemic issues. Now, as a national project coordinator and high needs case manager, Rosa continues to lead initiatives that drive meaningful change and enhance support systems for those in need. Our second presenter, Callandra Cochrane, is an intersectional feminist lawyer and has been a lawyer with the Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic for 8 years. Over the last 8 years, Callandra has worked as a family lawyer and with clients who have experienced sexual assault or workplace sexual harassment. Currently, she is the project lawyer for the clinic's Criminalization and Survivorship Project, aimed at preventing and addressing the criminalization of gender-based violence survivors. Thank you both for joining us here today, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
I think we can, so thank you for everyone for being here today and for coming to listen to us talk about this very important topic of criminalization of gender-based survivors. We're really glad to be here today and to have some time with you all. Next slide, Emma. Thank you. So for today, we're going to introduce the project that we work on, which is the Criminalization and Survivorship Project. And then we're going to give you some information about how survivors of gender-based violence are criminalized, and how coercive control and litigation abuse play into that as well, and how the project is hoping to address the criminalization of gender-based survivors.
So the next slide is the introduction, and the goal of the project is to address the disproportionate impact of the law on women and gender diverse people who identify violence against them, particularly intimate partner violence and sexual violence, but then find themselves facing criminal and other consequences. And also scaling up promising practices from the clinic's Criminalization of Women program. And this project is a 30-month project, ending in March 2026. We began the project in January 2024. And the project has the community engagement lawyer. Callandra is the project lawyer, and the national project coordinator, myself, I am Rosa. I'm the project coordinator, and it is a national project. The location we have it, Edmonton and Toronto, GTA, Montreal, and Halifax.
Okay, so we'd hope to give you a primer today on how survivors are criminalized. So to begin, I'd like to share a little bit about our Criminalization of Women project, which is the catalyst for this project, for the Criminalization of Survivorship and Survivorship project. So the Criminalization of Women project started around 2018, and it was kind of the brainchild of one of our dear colleagues who's worked at the clinic for many, many years, Paula Alaves, who noticed that survivors were coming to the clinic and they were being charged with criminal charges for things like assault with a weapon, or other things that they engaged in, usually as a point of self-defense or retaliatory violence, or reactive violence. Her noticing this trend led to her telling our executive director, Deepa Matu, that this really needs to be addressed. We have no services for these gender-based violence survivors who are experiencing this, and I would really like to see something at the clinic that would help survivors navigate their criminal charges. So the way we've seen at the clinic gender-based violence survivors be charged is in several different ways. The first is in family law, and with mandatory charging policies. So mandatory charging policies were, I think, established in the 80s. And the hope of lawmakers at that time, advocates at the time, was that in introducing mandatory charging policies for domestic violence or intimate partner violence, that more people would actually end up getting charged. More perpetrators or people that harm would get charged. Unfortunately, what we've seen is an unintended consequences of the mandatory charging policies, where police have to charge someone when there is a domestic violence call, that survivors sometimes are inappropriately charged. And this can be because police rely on intimate or inaccurate information about from their partners. And they may focus on individual instances of violence instead of recognizing the ongoing patterns of violence in the relationship, or the course of control and litigation abuse in the relationship, which we'll get to. And sometimes police also don't recognize survivors using violence as a form of self-defense, that they don't recognize them actually being survivors. And then in the family law context, survivors are increasingly being charged in relation to continued contact with abusers required by custody orders. So one thing that's really difficult in when survivors are charged with assault or another criminal offense related to intimate partner violence is that sorry, I lost my words there. is what we're seeing is that they automatically get a no contact order. And a no contact order means that they can't contact their spouse for while the criminal charges are being played out in court. So this can go directly against custody orders in family law, and can go against parenting time in family law, and can make it really difficult to navigate parenting time and decision making when there's a no contact order in place. And so oftentimes we see that the criminal no contact order goes against whatever the family law orders is, and then the person has to go through another separate step of getting bail variation in order to deal with to be able to speak to their spouse about their children. Or if they don't do that and they do just continue contacting the spouse, they are very at risk of being charged with a separate charge, which is failure to comply with the court order of the no contact order. So we see in family law that being an issue, and also with contempt orders in family law is another way that survivors can be criminalized if they're not wanting to provide or not following court orders to provide parenting time or in decision making because of the abuse that is not being recognized by the court. That can be another way that through family law that survivors are criminalized. Next slide, please. And in sexual assault law, survivors can be charged when their assailant alleges to the police that the survivor was actually the one who assaulted or sexually assaulted them. And also survivors can be charged or threatened to be charged if the police do not believe their statement. They can be charged with giving a false report to the police. So there's also ways in sexual assault law that we see survivors being charged. It makes it really difficult. We have seen cases where the survivor reports to the police their spouse of intimate partner violence, and then the spouse turns back on them and charges them with assault or sexual assault. This is as a retaliatory tactic to keep them engaged with the law and to continue to have impact on their lives. Next slide. And in immigration and refugee law, what we see survivors with precarious immigration status. They face risks of being deported or denied status if they report abuse or are criminalized. So if they're criminalized in any way, their status is very much in Canada is very much at risk. And what we see a lot with the clients that we serve here at the clinic through the Criminalization of Women project is women, especially migrant women from other countries that come here are newcomers, and they might be sponsored by their spouse, or their spouse might have more ability to navigate the systems in Canada, maybe speaks more English or has had more time here in Canada, and that they use that against the survivor, and that they actually report the survivor for intimate partner violence as a way to get at the survivor, and hopefully, in their view, hopefully impact their immigration status and their ability to stay in Canada. So we see this, like especially sponsorship of spouses, used as a tool by abusers to control the survivor and keep them in their gambit. So what we also have seen and know of is survivors of human trafficking and forced marriage who come forward experience heightened scrutiny for their criminal status, for engaging in criminal behaviors related to human trafficking or forced marriage as well. Next slide, please.
So the next one is, what is cohesive control? Cohesive control is a pattern of behavior used to dominate, intimidate, and manipulate another person. Often in intimate relationships, it is not always physical, but can also be other forms of abuse. And it is harmful. Like forms of cohesive control include isolation, that is restricting contact with family, friends, or supportive network to increase dependence. And also monitoring and surveillance, tracking movements, the partner's movements, and reading their phone messages using spyware or constantly checking in. And it could be financial control, that would be restricting access to money, controlling their spending, or forcing financial dependence. Or the other form would be gaslighting or emotional manipulation. That would be distorting reality to make the victim doubt themselves, or their memories, or their perception. And the other form of coercive control would be threats and intimidation, using threats like physical, emotional, legal, or their reputational to instill fear and compliances. And it is regulating the everyday life, controlling what the victim wears, eats, where they go, how they behave, and also sexual, into pursuing or forcing unwanted sexual activity or using sex as a means of control. And if parental alienation is part of coercive control too, that could be manipulating children against the other parent or threatening custody loss, and using institution or systems like misusing the legal, medical, or immigration system to control or discredit the victim. And physical and verbal abuse included in it too, using violence or demeaning language to degrade and weaken confidence. These tactics work together to strip autonomy and keep the victim trapped in a relationship. And that is cohesive control, basically, in an intimate partner relationship. The next slide.
Yeah, and just to add about how coercive control can lead to criminalization. So coercive control in a relationship can lead to criminalization, not necessarily all the time of intimate partner violence. We do see that happening where, the control can be so overwhelming and so insidious that the survivor reacts in a way that is violent to protect her or themselves. That can be a way that coercive control can lead to criminalization. But also, coercive control can lead to criminalization of other crimes aside from intimate partner violence, such as drug trafficking, fraud, these sort of things, where the one doing harm, the abuser, uses coercive control to get the person to engage in criminal acts, to get the survivor to engage in criminal acts. Right now, it has been before the legislature, but now with the election coming up, we're unsure what is the future of any talks and legislation about criminalizing coercive control. But it is something legislators have been thinking of doing in Canada, and what has already been done in places like Scotland. At the clinic, we have taken the position and have argued before legislators that coercive control should not be criminalized. One of the reasons is that we fear, just like with mandatory charging policies, that coercive control will lead to survivors being criminalized. If it's criminalized, it will lead to survivors being criminalized. So we're cognizant of the unintended consequences of such legislation and how creating more crimes could lead to survivors being criminalized more. Also as well, coercive control could be really hard to prove in court. Our criminal system is really based off of individual individual instances of crimes. And especially when it comes to assault, it focuses on individual instances of assault and whether or not an assault happened. So it's really considered in moments of time and not patterns. And coercive control is all about patterns, and is less about individual instances of control. So it can be really hard to prove in court a pattern of crime or pattern of, coercive control. And also we've seen criminalizing intimate partner violence has not led to intimate partner violence subsiding, right? So in adding another thing to be criminalized is not going to lead to coercive control lessening in intimate partner relationships. And we need generally a better understanding of coercive control before criminalizing it. It's been a newer topic in the gender-based violence sector of what coercive control really is, how to define it, how to recognize it, and it's going to take some time for both the judiciary, the crown attorneys, the police to be able to recognize and understand these concepts and see it happening in their files, in their cases. So we need a better understanding as a society of coercive control, and how it can lead to things like criminalization. And also as well, it should be noted that financial discrepancies between the partners can prevent survivors from hiring lawyers who have the capacity to engage in the complexity of coercive control cases. Those cases will be more complex than simple intimate partner violence cases. It will require a lot of evidence. And it can be very difficult to get that evidence before the court. And when there's a financial income discrepancy between the partners, that can mean that the survivor, who may have less money, doesn't have the money to be able to hire a lawyer who can actually go through the complexity of the case. Next slide.
So the next slide is, what is litigation abuse? Litigation abuse is when perpetrators use legal tactics to assert power and control over the survivor. So litigation abuse is someone misuse the legal system to harass, intimidate, or control another person rather than to seek justice. And examples of litigation abuse, repeatedly filing meritless lawsuit to overwhelm or punish the other party, and using legal process or filing excessive motions or appeal to delay proceedings, or increasing cost, or using legal processes to control or stalk a former partner in case of domestic violence, or threatening legal action without basis to intimidate or silence someone, refusing to comply with court orders to prolong conflict. So these kind of examples are the litigation abuse. And also perpetrators can try to flip the narrative or claim partner suffers some sort of mental disorder. So it's, again, the blaming happens, and using the tactics to control and assert the power using legal systems.
So litigation abuse, the intention of it is often to create excessive financial burden on survivors. Survivors often don't have the same access to financial resources as the abusers, the perpetrators. And so that means that the abuser can go and hire legal counsel to delay proceedings, to create frivolous motions, to do any kind of tactics to continue the case in court and run the other party, the survivor, out of money to be able to afford for a lawyer to go on the case. And this can affect the legal outcomes that survivors can achieve. Also, not only can they create a financial burden in one case, they often try to just use multiple ways of litigating the issue to continue the burden on the survivor. The goal is to create stress and emotional toll that can impair the survivor's judgment and expectations of the system. So they can make like I said, they can make multiple complaints in multiple areas. What we've seen at the clinic is that they might make a family law case. They might start a criminal law case, the abuser, and with false charges against the survivor. They may also as well try to implicate professionals in their lives, especially in cases of where there's children, that they may make complaints about the child's psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist to their governing body, and create another system where another case in another system that creates more stress on the survivor to address those things. Like in the goal in that can be with implicating somehow the therapist, saying that they're not doing their job correctly, that they're not following their code of ethics, or something like this, is that to get the child's therapist changed to impact the family law proceedings in when there's a court mandated counseling and stuff like that. So it can be really stressful, and it can involve multiple systems, and systems are often complicit in enabling litigation abuse. Judges rarely call it out for what it is and as abusive. And it can be very difficult to get judges to see that, hey, this is what's going on. They also might start cases in other jurisdictions and other places in order to keep the litigation going. They may file claims. They might discharge claims and try any way they can to engage in litigation abuse. Next slide. So how are we hoping to address criminalization through our project, Criminalization and Survivorship? So like I said, Criminalization and Survivorship is born out of the Criminalization of Women project, which I failed to give you a little bit more information about. Our Criminalization of Women project at the clinic provides services to women who have been charged and gender diverse people who have been charged in relation to the gender-based violence they've experienced. And what we do is we give them some summary legal advice, and we help them navigate the criminal law system. So we're trying to take the best practices from that program, and we've created and are undergoing the review of a best practices manual to be able to provide it to other organizations, because what we do with that program is we have one lawyer who manages the program. And she gives the initial summary legal advice, and she kind of manages the cases. But we also have a list of pro bono lawyers who are experts in criminal law, who practice criminal law in day in and day out as defense lawyers, who will meet with the survivors to give them more detailed summary legal advice, and sometimes even help with Crown pretrials. Now, Crown pretrials are a way for anybody with a criminal charge to negotiate the resolution of that charge. And often what we see in the Criminalization of Women project is the resolution that the Crown is trying to seek is a peace bond and PARS, Partner Assault Response Program. And attending the Partner Assault Response Program isn't really applicable for the survivor, because the whole program is designed for the abuser. And I think as well, you have to kind of admit the harm that you've done, which can be very difficult for a survivor when they're actually the ones that are the targets of the assault and the abuse, and are not the ones perpetrating it. So that 12 to 15 week program is not really a good outcome for them in doing, and can be harmful to them to go through. And then peace bonds are usually in place for 1 year, and it's to keep the peace and be of good behavior, and generally not to contact the ex-spouse. Now, these peace bonds, they can show up on vulnerable sector checks. So it can be difficult for survivors at that time to proceed with their jobs, especially if they work in the vulnerable sector. Sometimes even affects their education paths and their ability to seek education, because whether colleges will let them, especially if it's like a practicum placement with vulnerable sector. So it's very difficult sometimes to actually go through the peace bond process. And many defense lawyers, Crown, duty counsel, think that PARS and a peace bond is a great resolution to criminal charges of assault, because it leads to no criminal conviction in the end. Once the peace bond is over, there's no more record of the peace bond and of the charges. However, as I just stated, that there is impacts in going through PARS and a peace bond, and it's not applicable for survivors. So at Crown pretrials, what our pro bono lawyers try to do is to negotiate with them with the Crown to get maybe counseling instead for the survivors at places like our clinic, and not to have a peace bond, so that they can continue on with their lives once the counseling is over, and have the charges dropped regardless, or concluded regardless. So that's the general promising practices that we have at the clinic with our Criminalization of Women program. And the goal of the Criminalization and Survivorship is to be able to provide this best practice manual to other organizations so that they can do the same thing in their organizations. We also will be developing policy papers that will discuss such things as what policies can be changed to impact and lessen the amount of survivors being charged with criminalization. We're also looking to do one on the use of self-defense, and how that has changed over time, and how coercive control can be brought into that. We're also having bilingual forums in each city, or forums in each city, and a bilingual one in Montreal. So we just had our one in Edmonton yesterday, so that was exciting. We did it via Zoom. And the goal of the forums in the different regions is to learn the regional realities of each region and how survivors are being criminalized in that region, and what resources are available for them, and what more can be done in those communities to address the criminalization of survivors. We're also doing regional court observations in all 4 cities as well. So again, just to remind you, it's Edmonton, Halifax, Montreal, and the Greater Toronto area. So we've have both employed students and volunteers that are going into the courts every day and are observing bail court, guilty plea court, domestic violence specific courts, to see what's happening in the courts, and how does this differ, maybe based on gender, based on race, and the findings of that regional court observations will help, and will help form the policy paper development. And what they're also looking at is how is domestic violence or intimate partner violence dealt with in the court system in these different regions. While we all are under the Criminal Code of Canada and the criminal law is federal in Canada, there's very much regional differences in how cases are dealt with based on location, based on the size of the community, the amount of criminal activity and what kind of cases they get. And so our students are also looking at what are the regional differences in how courts operate and deal with domestic violence cases, regardless, like as a whole, not just as in individual cases. So we're also doing consultation with stakeholders. We have done we're going to be establishing a national community engagement working group for service providers, which will hopefully get from service providers who deal with criminalized survivors to be able to come and speak to us and inform parts of the project. We'll also have multilingual fact sheets that we will be publishing that will be available for survivors to discuss, to give them knowledge about things like bail hearings, PARS and a peace bond, what PARS is and what peace bonds are, and what the path of the criminal process looks like, so they can get kind of a bird's eye view of what's ahead. These are the kind of fact sheets we're doing. We're also doing a mini guide on the criminal system for survivors. And as well, we have a national community engagement working group of survivors that have been engaged in the Criminalization of Women project, that are informing our outcomes of our multilingual fact sheets, and seeing, if there's any missing information, if there's anything unclear, if there's anything we need to include. They're reviewing those fact sheets as well. And both those national community engagement working groups is run by Rosa. Rosa does great work with the survivors and service providers, and she's the one heading up those parts of the project. What's missing on here is actually our pilot program for criminal court support. So back in January, we hired 4 paralegal students to do criminal court support for the survivors who are navigating criminal court. And so what they do is they go to court with them. and they see, they provide emotional support. They might provide support at other types of meetings, whether it be with social assistance meetings, or whether it be with meetings with other outside lawyers, like family law lawyers or something like this, and kind of help them navigate the whole process, and with a specific focus on the criminal law process, but it can reach a little bit farther than that. And as well, we're doing knowledge sharing and training, just as we are today, in sharing knowledge of what we know about criminalization of women and gender diverse people and survivors, and how we're seeing it on the ground in Toronto specifically, and hopefully, you know, all of this work that we're doing will inform the policy papers we're developing and will inform how we advocate on this issue moving forward in Canada, and will give us some substance to put forward when we're arguing for things like coercive control not to be criminalized, or for mandatory charging to be changed, that we have information to back up why these things should be changed. So that's the goal of the project. Aside from also just raising awareness of the issue of criminalizing survivors. So yeah, and I think I'll take this last little bit to tell you a little bit about what we have seen through the project so far, and how the criminalization of survivors is really difficult. It can be often perpetuated by gender bias. For example, you know, police just not believing survivors, for police believing stereotypes about survivors, like maybe, you know, the stereotype, like racial stereotypes, such as the angry Black woman and stuff like that. We also have seen that what was really interesting is we've seen that with assault with a weapon, women are being charged with assault with a weapon, and it being the weapon is something like an iced coffee or the child's teddy bear. While men are being charged with things that are actually a weapon, such as knives and guns. And so that's really interesting that we're seeing this gender bias in these cases, and women being charged with assault with a weapon when it's not really something that could do real harm to somebody. Yes, a lot of things can be weapons that do harm, but a child's stuffy and an iced coffee are not something that could cause harm. And we're seeing how more and more how coercive control and litigation abuse play into this, and how survivors are having to navigate criminal processes while trying to heal, and maybe also trying to deal with family law issues or immigration law issues, and it being very difficult to navigate both at the same time. So I think this concludes this part of the webinar. I think we talked a little fast, but we're more than happy to answer all of your questions, and yeah, have a little bit more discussion about criminalization of survivors.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. I don't think you talked fast. It was great, and you shared so much excellent information.
Great.
Emma, can you quickly put up the final slide? So before we move into the Q&A, and at this point, if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box. You should see that on the bottom of your screen. But do take a moment, and Jason will also share it in the chat for you, to give us feedback about this and also link to the website to check out future webinar Wednesdays. So while we're waiting for the questions to come in, I wanted to thank you again for such important information. And I've always followed your clinic's work, but I had no idea just how much you were doing in terms of advocacy and knowledge mobilization. And just, it's incredibly impressive and such a wonderful resource for all of us to know about. I was wondering just a bit, it's slightly off the topic of this, but I wanted to know, Rosa, if you could share a little bit more about your work on the migration project, because that sounds so fascinating.
Okay, sure. So that was a national project that we had it in BC, Quebec, and Manitoba, Ontario. So 4 provinces involved, and the main organization was in BC, and Barbara Schleifer was partnered with it. And then we worked on policy position paper, draft policy position paper for recommendation for policy change. Basically, we had sex and migration workers, and then we had another policy position paper for gender-based violence survivors, how the survivors are affected, and that was one of the papers we did. And so those are the recommendations. At the end of the project, we met with the MP, and then we presented what we had, the recommendations, and we were hoping like it would go somewhere to in the policy change, like they will have an idea or of rough idea of what migrant women's needs are. So that is what the project was about. It was a 2-year project which is ended. And we had the draft policy position paper. So right after that, then we had the clinic started this project, Criminalization and Survivorship Project. So I took the project coordinator position for that, and we are working on that now.
Yeah, and Sarah, if I might
Yeah,
add, I
please.
just realized that we didn't really give an intro to our clinic and what our clinic does.
Yeah,
So
please go
if
ahead.
you give me
Yeah.
a few moments, I'll do that. So our clinic is based in Toronto, and we serve women and gender diverse people who've experienced violence. And we do that in multiple ways. We have a legal team that helps in family law cases, in immigration law cases, and with sexual assault, advising survivors of their options after a sexual assault. We also have special projects such as this one that do specialized services. So we have the Criminalization of Women project that helps women and gender diverse people who are criminalized. We also have the #AndMeToo project, which helps women and gender diverse people who have been sexually harassed at work or assaulted at work, navigate that and pursue legal complaints and internal employer complaints. We also have as well a self-represented litigants project, which helps self-represented litigants navigate whatever legal system they're navigating. We have counseling at the clinic. So our services we aim for them to be wraparound and consider the whole person and not just the legal matters that they're involved in. So we have counseling services where we run groups as well. So we do individual counseling, we do group counseling, and then we also have interpretation services. Our interpretation services are really cool because what we do with them is we train interpreters, women and gender diverse people to become interpreters, and then we hire them to do interpretation for us at the clinic. And they also can take on jobs like they're an independent contractor. They can take on jobs elsewhere as well. So interpretation as well, which is really needed because most of our clients come from racially and ethnically diverse communities and require language translation. So we have or interpretation. So we have interpretation services. And yeah, we also have some childcare while people have appointments. And we really try to provide, like I said, wraparound services for the survivor. We also have high needs case management, which is what Rosa does. Rosa, I'll let you speak a little bit about your role as a high needs case manager.
High need case manager, basically, the client who has a complex needs, they have criminal code happening, and then they do have mental health issues. They needed support navigating the system. So the clients who have multiple and complex needs, and those are the clients that I provide support. So I'm doing part-time as a national project coordinator for Criminalization and Survivorship Project. Other part-time I'm doing as high needs case manager. And also clinic has transitional and housing support programs. So the clients who come to the clinic who have been abused by the partner, and we help them get subsidized housing, priority housing. And of course, housing has its own policy, like you have to be living with the abuser or left the abuser within 3 months, you need to apply. But in those criteria categories, if women qualifies, then we help them get the housing too. So the clinic has all support system, legal counseling, housing, case management, and all the calls goes through intake. So then intake decided who they allocated the client for services.
Yeah. And we also as well operate as a clinic with core values such as anti-racism, anti-oppression, and providing trauma-informed services to survivors. So that kind of forms the basis of our work at the clinic with each other and with the survivors that we serve.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I love like the wraparound holistic approach, especially. And as you're describing it, it sounds to me a lot like you've really preempted a lot of things that would be barriers to safety for these survivors. So that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
We did have a question come in, and it's a little bit two-part, so I'll break it down as we go. But the first part of the question is, does this program only focus on gender minorities and women, or does it support men who are victims of domestic violence as well?
Yes, so our clinic only focuses on women and gender diverse people. So that is the focus of the program as well.
And the second part of the question is, how can we refer clients to you that may benefit from this support?
Yeah, so part of our Criminalization of Women project, that can help people in Ontario. You can find the information on our website, schleiferclinic.com, of the Criminalization of Women project, and contact our intake team if you have a client that you think should be, helped.
That's great. Thank you. And they also in their question said, loved the presentation. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Oh, perfect. And Rosa did put some information in the chat as well that would help.
Thank you, Rosa.
And now we have a bit more time for questions if anyone wants to put them in the Q&A function. And I have one more as we're waiting to see if others have questions, although I know that your presentation provided so much information and clarity already. So for both of you personally, what do you love most about this work? Because it's work that has so much passion driving it.
Rosa, I'll let you go first.
To me, I started working at the clinic as a housing worker. So when I started working as a housing worker, when a women come to the clinic and like want to relieve the abuser, but there's no financial means, so supporting getting them welfare, which is Ontario Works, we call it, and that again housing and the happiness, the peace, and the freedom the women feel, that motivation, that feeling of that freedom that a woman got, that is what the happiness it started for me. And then from that on, different position I held at the clinic. And this particular project, Criminalization and Survivorship, and I run the Community Engagement Working Group. Then we do have 10 participants in the group who went through the criminalization. Not only we provide information, and then we learn so much from them too, because they have firsthand experience going through the criminal justice system and how they get affected by it. And the reality of what exactly happened, but how the system and the perpetrator changed the narrative and where they ended up, the knowledge that we are receiving from them, and that is tremendous. And so one of the participants after the last community engagement working group that she emailed when she came to the clinic, she said, use this to whatever purpose you needed, whether it is for a project or for funding purpose, anything, use this, because she wrote it from her heart, saying she came to the clinic because the perpetrator abused her without, she speaks Farsi. She said, I didn't know how to communicate well in English language, and the clinic held me in their hand and supported me through everything. I got housing, I got court support, I got Ontario, like the whole all support. And she said, I'm a free woman now. Like that letter made us feel like we achieved so much kind of a feeling. It may not be the whole people, but one person at a time, right? Like it's every woman is in an abuse-free life. That is the courage and happiness and the motivation and enthusiasm, like everything, we get it from the women we are supporting and serving.
So well said.
Yeah, I don't know how I follow up Rosa on that one. That was a beautiful answer. But I think what I really love about my role is bringing awareness to the issue. And I think it's something that is really overlooked among lawyers, among Crown attorneys, the police, general society, that and service providers, that this can happen to survivors. I think it's often shocking to people that this can happen to survivors, but we see it on a daily basis here at the clinic. And yeah, I get a lot of happiness sharing the information and knowing that, with one more person knowing about the issue, that that will help the women we serve as well, and the gender diverse people we serve as well. So yeah, that's what I really love most about my job.
How you both explain that is just so powerful, and it stands out to me. I think it's an important message for all of us is we can't single-handedly fix the whole problem, but survivor by survivor, we can make a big difference. Absolutely. Another question came in from Claire. Claire was wondering, what type of coordination or collaboration are you looking for in regards to receiving more referrals from other healthcare teams, clinics, or hospitals?
Rosa, do you want to answer, or?
So we basically provide services to for people who are in Ontario. So clients who live in Ontario, like we don't have catchment area in terms of in Ontario. So we provided service for them. So and that is for client surveys. For project, this is a national project. So we are doing national project, we are doing forums, we are doing webinars, and like we code observations. Like we hire students to do the code observation and then learn from them what they observed in criminal code, like it's any litigation abuse, like whatever they are observing, that based on that we are thinking of writing the policy paper too. So that is what we are doing right now. But in terms of client work, it's the clients from Ontario we are serving.
Great. Thank you. And just for my
Kelly,
own
do you
personal
want to
interest.
share? Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Sarah.
sorry. No, please. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off, Rosa.
No, sorry. Kelly, you wanted to add?
Oh, yeah, all I was going to say is that, you know, for places in Ontario, I think connecting with our intake team would be best, as well as, you know, thank you for being here today because it's really great. I assume, Claire, that you're from a healthcare team of some sort, to learn these things because you likely come across these survivors as well in the work that you do. And just knowing more about the topic can mean that there's more referrals to our program if needed, and that more women get and gender diverse people get helped. So
That's fantastic. So we have one more of a comment than a question coming in, and I think it's a fantastic way to wrap up unless anyone wants to pop more questions in the chat. But an anonymous attendee says, "Thank you for sharing this insightful and very much needed project with us. Your dedication goes a long way. You mentioned that you had working groups of survivors helping you develop a lot of the post-project materials. So I guess there's a little bit of a question. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about what this process looks like, and thank you."
yeah, so we have students that are researching the topics and kind of create the first draft of the multilingual fact sheet. And then from there, I review it as the lawyer on the project to make sure it's legally accurate. And then we get another lawyer at the clinic to also review it to make sure it's legally accurate as well. And then we present it to the community engagement working group, which meets 2 to 3 times a year. So we first present on the topic about whatever topic it is for them to gain an understanding, and then have them look at the fact sheet itself, which is 1 to 2 pages, and give us any feedback of whether there's like missing information or other things that I mentioned before. And then from there, we'll go get it translated into different languages through our interpretation team. So yeah.
It's also wonderful and thoughtful how you integrate survivors into your work.
It's
Oh,
very important.
absolutely. I think survivors' voices are the thing that should always be at the forefront of this work. So
Agreed.
thank you both for doing that, and to your clinic. I think that wraps up the questions. So I'm sure everyone in the virtual audience is joining me in thanking you both so much for taking the time today and for providing us such important and thoughtful information about your work. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
to
you,
those,
Sarah.
thank you. And to those in attendance, please make sure to take the survey as well. It's in the chat for you.